Now, a brutal murder case that gripped the tri-states is now receiving even more national attention. Tim Bliefnick was found guilty of murdering his wife, Becky. Throughout his trial, Bliefnick remained silent, not even taking the stand in his own defense. But now the convicted killer is breaking his silence. Erin Moriarty has an exclusive interview with him on tomorrow night's 48 Hours. Erin joining us now. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Mackenzie. This was a very poignant and puzzling case because, when you cover a story like this, you have this couple with the 3 kids. They seem to have everything, and so it's always very difficult to cover something where there's so much tragedy. You have the mother gone, the father in prison, and these kids now living with family members.
Yeah, exactly. And this case is about a local Illinois man that is very well known in our community. Now, the reason it made national news was because of the answer he gave on the game show Family Feud years earlier. Now, when asked what is the #1 regret that people have from their wedding day, he said, saying I do. So what did you learn about Tim and Becky's relationship during your interview?
Well, Mackenzie, I even asked him about that remark, asking because that remark has put so much attention to his case, whether he regretted it, and he said, no, it was a joke. And back then, this was 2019 when he appeared on the show, things seemed to be good between the couple. But 2 years after that, they separated, and then really it's almost hard to understand why the divorce became so contentious. I even asked that in the interview. You were the one who filed. You're the one who wanted the divorce. Why is it taking so long? Why are you changing your demands? And he really did not have a strong answer on that. I think sometimes that's what happens with couples. He would say she was the one who was being difficult. The state would say he was having difficulty letting go, that he was a person who liked to have control.
Yeah, and speaking about their separation, I'm curious to know, people have divorces every day and they don't end in murder. So what did you learn from the prosecutor's point of a specific motive?
Well, realize that Becky Bliefnick was killed 1 week before this case was supposed to go to trial, and the state contends that Tim had a lot to lose financially. Personally, there would have been some information about the family that was potentially embarrassing. Tim, however, said to me, no, everything that was already known. He just wanted the whole thing to be over. But that is, in fact, what, the state doesn't have to prove a motive. I should point that out. It's not necessary. But usually jurors need to have some reason, and that is what the state believes.
Yeah, and Tim has continued to say he did not murder Becky. But does he offer any other theory as to who he believes might have killed Becky?
His attorney, Casey Schnock, contends that the investigators should have looked far more into this idea of a prowler. In fact, one of the neighbors near Becky had actually gotten cameras because of a prowler earlier who had been breaking into cars. And so that is what Casey Schnock says. And in fact contends that that's who killed Becky Bliefnick. But what is difficult about that is, yes, somebody did break into Becky's house and came up on the roof and broke in, but she was shot 14 times. The actual killing took about a minute, and then the person left without taking anything. And that's not usually consistent with a prowler. And that's, that is very difficult for the defense to explain. I mean, who else then would have that kind of anger is a very difficult question to answer.
Yeah, so why don't prosecutors believe that a brawler is the one who broke into the house and shot her?
Because of the violence, because it was such a vicious and terrible murder. And there's some circumstantial evidence that certainly points to Tim. What made this case so unusual, Mackenzie, is that, this murder happened this year. It's very rare to go to trial right away, and they went to trial within 3 months. They had to. Prosecutors wanted to keep Tim Bliefnick in jail at the time, and so he was entitled to a speedy trial, and he took it. And the state then had to come up with an entire trial in 3 months, which is very difficult. There isn't a lot of direct evidence. There is ballistics, but a lot of it is circumstantial. And as you saw that video, which the defense points out, you cannot tell whether that's a male or female, and the state is contending that's definitely Tim Bliefnick.
Yeah, and now the couple had 3 young sons. Where were they at the time of the murder?
They would have been, the 3 boys would have been with their mother, but Becky had called Tim the day before and said she wasn't feeling well. She had had, some medical, like a small operation earlier, and she was recuperating, and she asked him to keep the kids. Which again, where he says, I would not leave. I had 3 young boys in the house. I would not leave and kill my wife. But he did live only a mile away, and that's what the state contends, that person that you see on the bike, the state contends that is Tim, even though you can't tell male or female. And you see the bike going there, and you see the bike going back, and that it would have taken a very short period of time. And as you know, the jury believed that as well and convicted him.
Yeah. And during all your findings, what were some of the key pieces of evidence that led investigators to Tim's arrest?
Well, there was a lot of circumstantial evidence, but so there were little pieces of Aldi bags that were found around her. And of course, in his home, he had a lot of Aldi bags. I think probably the most incriminating involved these spent shell casings that were found inside his house that an expert tied directly to shell casings that were found at the crime scene. And then also the searches on his phone. Now, Casey Schnock, Tim's attorney, says you don't know when those searches were done, but they are incriminating searches. Things like, how do you get gunpowder off your hands? What is the response time for the Quincy, Illinois police? There were several things that, were questionable things that he was researching.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and adding to the story.
Thank you, Mackenzie.